Hi, Nina here, and you're with Nina Cooks. Today was my second day at ICE, the Institute of Culinary Education, and we learned about sanitation. And sanitation is super critical, and which is why it's one of the first lessons that we learn, is to make us aware of why it's so important to follow these procedures and understand the dangers behind not handling food properly, letting food spoil. Just to put that into perspective, about 48 million people suffer from foodborne illnesses a year, which is about 131,000 a day. And then out of those, about 8 people die from the foodborne illnesses a day. So that's a really scary number to imagine that every day people are dying. So many people are dying from foodborne illnesses, and which is why it's so critical to understand the science behind what's causing these illnesses. And so today in class, we went over sort of what are the contaminants, what are the conditions that support the contaminant growth. There are food that naturally are more prone to contamination and why that is, as well as the acronym FATTOM, which teaches us like what are those conditions. It's an acronym for the growth conditions, and just how rapidly bacteria reproduces in food. And and then you have people suffer from allergies, and to make sure that you know exactly what goes into your food so you can tell your diners what is in the food so they can avoid it, or just recommend them to pick something that's safer for them if they have an existing allergy, because lots of people die from allergies as well, because it could be life-threatening as it is if it's not handled properly. So we're going to talk about a lot of things, and but I do think it's important to make a segment on this, because I think a lot of people, especially home chefs, are, myself included, are never conscious of these things. And yes, I follow wash my cutting board and knife after cutting meat and these sort of protocols, but maybe we don't always store our food at a specific temperature or thaw food at a specific temperature for, the method of thawing is incorrect, which could be injecting toxins into the food that we consume. And so I just wanted to give the lesson of what I learned and give sort of a warning and recommendation on how to handle food safety, because it is a very important thing before you go and make food for people to eat. And I like my instructor when he compared us as chefs to surgeons, right? You wouldn't want a surgeon to just come off the street without washing his hands, with dirt on his clothes, and just operating on you. Same thing applies to chefs. You don't want someone like that to be handling food, to be potentially infecting food with viruses, parasites, bacteria, and things like that. So these are sort of the procedures that we should be following, especially when it comes around personal hygiene, right? Making sure you always wash your hand when you're cutting something and you touch your face, your mouth, wash your hands afterwards, because there's things living on your skin, right? And so you don't want to have contact with that. So washing your hand after using the bathroom, that's really a no-brainer, because there's this potential spread of viruses. And with COVID still pretty fresh on our minds, viruses can be transmitted from person to person in that way, rather than in the food themselves. So just being aware that that's out there. So all these things that can cause illnesses in the bioorganisms, the virus, they're called pathogens. So pathogen is just all-encompassing term to describe anything that can cause illness to humans. Bacteria, fungus, virus, and parasite, and they have different conditions for growth, but specifically, and we're going to talk about bacteria growth. So the acronym FATTOM stands for food. So this is food that specifically are more prone to getting infected or pathogens on there. A stands for acidity. So specifically, these bacteria like to grow in a pH neutral substance or in food that are pH neutral, so they don't like acid as much. Time in normal growth, in an ideal temperature for bacterial growth, they double every 20 minutes. So after about 4 hours or so, you reach a level that is truly toxic and can cause illness in humans. So that's time. T stands for temperature. So the temperature range where they love to grow is between 41 degrees Fahrenheit to 137 degrees Fahrenheit. Within these temperatures, you don't want to leave food out for a long period of time. O stands for oxygen. A lot of the bacteria grow well in they love oxygen. However, there are some exceptions to that, and botulism is one of the pathogens that can grow without oxygen. So they're usually found in canned food. So if you see a bulging can of whatever, don't eat it, just throw it away. And M, so last but not least, stands for moisture. So they like to grow in a moisture-rich environment. So anything that's above a 0.85, water being 1.0, anything above a 0.85 becomes more prone to bacterial growth. So FATTOM, good acronym to remember. Things that we can control are time and temperature. The other parts like oxygen, it's really hard to control that. Moisture is very hard to control that. But so what we can control is to make sure that our food is handled properly in the proper temperature, cooked to a proper degrees. In terms of cooling something down quickly, remember, if you just let your food sit out there, the temperature is going to drop. It's going to drop into a temperature that might promote growth. So you don't want to leave it out and let it naturally cool. So in that instance, an ideal procedure might be to cut it into a smaller portion so there's more surface area to promote cooling. You might want to use an ice bath. So let's say you have 4 gallons of soup, you might want to divide that into 4 parts and then use a pot to kind of submerge it in ice water so that they cool a lot faster. What you never want to do is to directly put hot food into the refrigerator. And the reason is that, number one, it won't cool quickly, because if you have a large amount of something, the outside is going to cool faster, but the inside is going to go a lot slower, and that's the temperature that could be promoting bacterial growth. And 2, because you're raising the temperature of your refrigeration unit and you're affecting the other overall the temperature in your fridge, which affect other food that's already placed there. So never ever put hot food in the fridge. You want to cool it down first. And so the 2 ways is to put it in an ice bath or just break it out into smaller portions so that it cools faster. What restaurants started using is blast chillers. You might have heard this. It's basically like a rapidly cooling refrigeration unit. So that it cools very, very rapidly. So that's cooling. In terms of thawing, that's another pretty common thing that happens in my household, at least, because when I cook for Lingo, I buy a batch amount of meat and I put the meat, I separate it into smaller portions and I put them in the freezer. So every time I need it, it's fresh, right? And I need to take it out and defrost it before I cook his food. So in this case, there's 2 methods that you can, or a couple of methods where you can handle thawing of food. And the first one is to just leave it in your fridge overnight or for 2 days or 24 hours. That should give it ample amount of time so that the outside starts to thaw for the most part, and then it's okay if it's meat that's like a little bit frozen and the inside it's still you can still cut it. But 1 to 2 days in the fridge to thaw like a 1 pound pork or chicken or steak is probably the most ideal procedure to do that. So that means you need to plan ahead. If you want to cook something and you know it's frozen, you have to take it out in advance. Another method you can do is to run it under cold water. So key here is using cold water because hot water will cook your food, right? It's the outside is going to reach a temperature and it's going to start cooking, and you don't want to do that. So you want to do cold water, run it in cold water, isolate the meat or whatever you're thawing, maybe in a bag that's sealed, and run cold water so it doesn't contaminate the rest of your sink. And especially don't put ready to eat food next to anything that's thawing, obviously, because there could be cross-contamination issues where, you know, when whatever you're thawing could in itself have pathogens before you cook it. And then there's other methods. You can, you know, defrost it in a microwave, you know, absolutely okay to do. Just make sure it's somewhat sealed in a microwave-safe container, and then you can defrost it in the microwave. And the last thing is you can always just cook frozen meat or anything frozen directly. That's also okay. Let's say I have vegetables that's been frozen, like ready to cook vegetables, or if I have ground beef sometimes and I'm making a chili, I can just kind of put it in the pan and let it like naturally defrost in the pan, maybe on a low heat setting. That's also okay. So either plan ahead or, you know, like think of don't let your food sit out there in the open for unattended for hours on hours, because that's definitely not a time and temperature factor into like growth promotion. All right, so I want to talk about hazards like chemical, biological, and physical contamination. So biological contamination comes from food that are naturally more prone to getting contaminants. So that's food that has like more nutrients in them. So egg or a piece of chicken is more likely to be contaminated than a piece of lettuce. Lettuce completely for different reasons, but the meat itself is like it has like the condition, it has nutrients that would promote the growth, more likely to have bacteria. So they have a natural potential for it. Milk, eggs, shellfish, fish, baked potatoes, meat, poultry, raw sprouts. You have heated, like untreated garlic oil, any ready-to-eat food, delis, spices, salad. So all these food kind of are more just prone to getting infection, pathogens growing in them. And we talked about bacteria using FATTOM. We also need to be aware, we talked about viruses that's transmitted from person to person. We talk about parasites off of a host. Let's say a fish could have a parasite leaching onto the fish. It doesn't kill the host or the fish itself, but it kind of sucks the nutrients from the fish so that it itself can thrive inside. And once the people eat that fish, then that parasite could grow in, you know, as long as it has the right conditions, and our stomach acid is not always strong enough to kill off parasites. So that's how we do end up getting parasites in our stomachs. And just eating any food or even contaminated water that have parasite in them can cause, you know, parasite growth in people. Never eat raw chicken or pork, because then they could also be transmitting parasites in addition to bacteria. Pretty nasty stuff. And last but not least, there's the category of fungus or fungi. And fungus is naturally occurring in the air, on surfaces. So the most common fungus contaminants are like mold and yeast. So mold they tend to be greenish looking. If you ever leave anything in your fridge, especially jam, you'll see that some green stuff, like it's happened to me where I find my jam and it's like something green moldish. So and there's no way to kind of separate the mold from the rest of your food. So if you're something is, you see food mold on it, you just have to throw it all away. It tastes no different. It's not spoiled, it's just contaminated, and at that point you can't decontaminate it, and so it's just safe to just throw it out. Yeast, if you ever has a very pungent sour smell to it. So like if you have fruits that has turned like really sour, almost to the point of like becoming alcoholic, that's yeast at work. And obviously there's good yeast that we use to bake our bread. There's good yeast that we make to make kombucha. But that yeast is a lot different from the bad yeast that naturally occurred. So, you know, at that point, if your food just smells totally funky, you should definitely throw that out. When you can't destroy the toxins and you can't taste the difference, let's say you left a fish out for, I don't know, 4 hours at 45 degrees Fahrenheit, which is like the ideal temperature for bacterial growth. You'll cook it and you'll eat it and it'll taste no different, but it's already in itself is toxic, right? And so you don't realize it. And sometimes because you don't realize that, you don't taste the difference, then you're basically eating something that's already contaminated. And, you know, how do you prevent that? How do you make sure that doesn't happen to you? And that's where the proper refrigeration, never leave fish out, don't leave meat out for, you know, more than X amount of time in room temperature, when it's the ideal room temperature and time for them to grow. If anything has been sitting out for more than 2 hours or 4 hours, just toss it. At that point, like, it's not worth risking your life to save the food that you accidentally left out. Chemical toxins are also, or chemical contaminants are also an issue to be aware of. So let's say that you have cleaning products, something that has bleach in it. That is definitely a chemical toxin. And if you mix it with food, it will cause illnesses. And so, you know, cleaning products, anything that's like pesticide on vegetables is also toxic. So washing fruits and vegetables and making sure that you separate out your cleaning products away from your food products, making sure there's clear labeling. If you created like your own, you filled a bottle with like cleaning products, you should label that cleaning products, not for consumption, leave it in a separate area, right? Don't mix food and cleaning products together, because cleaning products are chemical toxins. Yeah, and then really look at the instructions for how your cleaning products or whatever chemical cleaners you use, and make sure that it's, let's say you just cleaned your table, it's still on there, you probably don't want to put food directly on there. And if we do have sanitation, so in class we have a sanitizing solution, and yeah, obviously I asked the question, is it food grade? Like, it's safe to consume? And my teacher replied, yes, it's food grade safe, food safe, and there's a specific ratio that is regulated. So mix the portion of sanitation product to water needs to be a specific ratio as well. So those like are rules and protocols that you should be followed for cleaning, sanitation, chemical products. And then last thing is physical contaminants. So physical contaminants can be metal shavings or glass. Rubber band is a big thing because it's always on like fruits and vegetables, and my teacher said that they're really found pretty common where they're not supposed to show up. So definitely a physical contaminant. Also fingernails, bones, food bits. So the way to circumvent that is to closely monitor the cooking process of your food, closely inspect the food that's produced, and just making sure that it's safe from also physical contaminants. All right, I think we talked about food contamination from rubbing your nose, touching your ears, scratching, running your hand through your hair. So, and after you do any of that, which is like a very unconscious thing that humans do, like we all do this, but it's important to just kind of wash your hands, right? Like wipe down your stations, making sure that like to make it a habit not to do that, right? Like start using this thing and like sneezing into your shirt instead of covering your mouth with your hands, right? Like going like this. This is called a vampire sneeze or a vampire cough, right? Put your nose into your elbow, which has your shirt on it. And you should always be covering your mouth to prevent the spread of viruses, right? Like we talked about viruses, so like covering that is really important to do. And also taking care of yourself, being conscious of like if you're sick, you probably shouldn't be around food or other people, right? Take a sick day, right? Don't go in there thinking, oh, I'll just power through it, because then you're introducing contaminants to food, to other people, and that's not okay. All right, let's talk about food storage. So food that's been out that you need, let's say, so storage, food that you've cooked, let's say you want to store it, right? We talked about the cooling process, how to properly cool it down, and you want to store it away. Always make sure it has a proper label on it. So a proper label says what is it, when was it cooked, when should it be thrown out, like when is it good until, and then anytime it's after 7 days, you should probably throw it out, right? Over 7 days, definitely throw it out, but properly labeling them for using, like, let's say canned products, like let's say I have diced tomato, canned diced tomato. There's this first in, first out method of like if it goes in, you want to use the oldest product that's in there first. So like the oldest can of tomatoes should be the first one that you use. This is just to ensure that nothing is expired, that you're always, using the oldest products and using that before replenishing whatever your supply is. So first in, first out rule. So another thing is having shelves and food never touching the ground, right? So it should be 6 inches above the ground so that you can properly clean underneath any storage unit or any shelves or tables that you have. So proper cleaning. Obviously, dry food should be stored in a dry place. Yeah, makes sense. How you refrigerate and store your ready-to-eat food is that you want the food that has the highest temperature that needs to be reheated. So think like probably chicken, right? Like raw chicken should be at the bottom, and then at the top should be the lowest temperature of reheating needed. That's probably like, I don't know, a sandwich or something, like you don't need to heat it at all. So that should be at the top. So the lowest cooking temperature to the highest cooking temperature in terms of shelf hierarchy. We talked about proper cooling. So hot food should never be put directly in the refrigerator, and break it into smaller parts. And you have, this is really important. You have 2 hours to get your food below 70 degrees Fahrenheit, and you have 4 hours to get your food below 41 degrees Fahrenheit. Remember, that's the danger zone. Danger zone is between 41 to 135. So from 135 to 70, you have 2 hours to do that, and then from 70 to 41 you have another 2 hours. So you have a 4-hour window to get your food from whatever temperature it was at down to below 41, and then you can store it in the refrigerator, and making sure your refrigeration unit is at 41 degrees Fahrenheit always, or below. Probably below. And how you handle the reheating of food should be done at 165 degrees for at least 15 seconds. So checking the internal temperature with our thermometer, making sure that it's reached the 165 degrees Fahrenheit and has done it for at least 15 seconds. So that's the ideal safe amount of heating that needs to be reached for it to kill away any potential contaminants that has happened while it was in refrigeration. Or you can microwave it if you're serving it directly. Yeah, and if it doesn't reach that throw it away. Within 2 hours, it's time to throw it away. Let's say you processed something out, you left it out, you forgot about it, it's been 2 hours, throw that out. You shouldn't eat it. Okay, cross-contamination, right? Like we talked about, covering your mouth and using ice that's been used to, let's say, like, you know, defrost or cool down something else. Don't use that water after the ice has melted for obvious reasons, because the contaminant could be in the water from the melted ice. Yeah, so I know covered a lot about food safety in terms of contamination, cross-contamination, food that's prone to bacteria or pathogen growth. I want to talk about like some of like the common ones that you probably have heard about, which is a food infection. So this is like food containing pathogens themselves. So the food itself can infect you, whoever consumes it. And then a good example of that is salmonella. So in eggs and poultry, so salmonella is like really deadly. It's pretty serious pathogen. So be aware, like the bacteria, pretty serious salmonella. A food intoxication is like toxins that are naturally produced in the food. So I think botulism. We talked about like canned food that has botulism in it. And the thing with botulism is that it doesn't need oxygen. It doesn't need oxygen to replicate, to reproduce, to like spread. So that's why it grows in canned food. So if something is not properly decontaminated before canning, like you're basically sealing the contaminant in with the food itself. So of course it's gonna go crazy, and that's why you have explosion of a can. Not really explode, but like expands. And then there's foodborne toxins. So foodborne toxin-mediated infection. So this is like E. coli. So let's say like we all know like lettuce, the E. coli outbreak with Chipotle, right? Like I think it was like 5-6 years ago, there was a huge outbreak with like lettuce having E. coli on it. So the lettuce itself is not really promoting the growth. It just happens to be touching, and then the E. coli hitched a ride on the lettuce, and then it kind of like from the lettuce without proper handling and cooking, because it's raw, without proper washing, the amount of E. coli has reached a critical mass of hurting, of like really causing illnesses to people. So a huge E. coli outbreak with lettuce. And yeah, lettuce tends to be just grown in, I guess, like animal manure, and E. coli tend to be found in animals. That's kind of dirty, especially cows. And their stomachs could potentially have E. coli. And it might not affect the animals that are hosting it. It's not a parasite, but you don't realize it until it's too late sometimes. And so those kind of bacteria are called foodborne toxin-mediated infection. All right, let's spend some time talking about food allergies, and this is the last topic that we'll cover today. So food allergies, as we know, some of the symptoms for allergies is itching, rash, sneezing, closing of your throat, and swollen glands. So that's what's causing your throat to close, which is the glands in your throat. And it's basically your body's immune system reacting to something that is actually not a toxin, right? Your body assumes that something is attacking your body, it's a pathogen that needs to get rid of, and it starts to attack itself because whatever the allergen from the food is, it kind of lands in your body, in your bloodstreams, in your stomachs, and your body thinks, oh no, I'm getting attacked by pathogen, so I must attack it. So allergies is unfortunate, and it's been occurring in people more and more often. Like I have a small allergy to overnight shellfish. So like if it's fresh, no problem. And shellfish actually in itself are considered one of the pathogen promoting foods, right? Like shellfish. And it's dangerous because it could either be producing, like collecting the chemicals in the environment, let's say like because these shellfish are filtering animals, so they get their nutrients by filtering water and taking out algae or you know, food naturally in water, and they're filtering it out. They might also be retaining some of the metals or toxins in the environment, like we talked about chemical toxins. So shellfish tend to be like that. So then not getting shellfish from so I think I don't know if I'm actually allergic to the shellfish themselves. I could be allergic to the chemical things, chemical toxins that are found in shellfish, and it doesn't happen all the time, but it does happen, and I've noticed it pretty often. So I try to limit my intake. So that's something else you can do, is like limit the intake of it, because as your body eats more, it's going to build up whatever toxin the shellfish has, and then it's going to lead to allergens, like your allergies down the road. So I'm just using myself as an example, but I also know my friend who's allergic to almonds, didn't really know it. I have friends who are allergic to wheat, so that's why you see a lot of gluten-free. They tend to be allergic to the gluten within the wheats themselves. You also have like tree nuts allergies. That's very common. So almonds, walnuts, pecans, as well as peanuts. Peanuts are not tree nuts, but they also cause allergies. Fish, soy is another thing. Recently, it's sesame seeds as well. So a lot of foodborne people who are allergic to like different types of food. So that's why you have to be very careful. And everyone, your servers should all know what's going in to the food. And if anyone's not sure, then don't recommend it, right? Or ask to verify, or just tell them to order something else. And other ways you can kind of prevent allergy attacks, or and your patrons are just wearing gloves, making sure there's no cross-contamination. Maybe you're handling something and then you went to handle something else without washing your hands or changing gloves. That's a one way. And maybe using specific cookware for those people with like those allergies, so you know never to put those allergens in with the rest of the food that they prepare. So just being very conscious that this does happen, and to always ask, whoever you're giving your food to, do you have any allergies? Just because it is a hazard, and it does affect a lot of people. All right, so just to recap, when we're cooling things down, ideal method is using an ice bath. Never put it in the refrigerator. Cool it down. You have 2 hours to cool it down to 70 degrees and 2 hours to cool it down to below 41 degrees. So making sure that's achieved. Botulism is like pretty serious. It can grow in a non-oxygenated environment. It can also grow in untreated garlic oil, so kind of be aware of that. Touching your face and then touching your food, you're cross-contaminating. You're introducing potential pathogens from your face to your food. So always washing your hand after you touch your phone, after you touch your face, after coming back from the bathroom. Washing hands is good, proper hygiene. Wiping down your station, wiping down your knife between the different ingredients that you cut with a sanitizing solution is also an ideal way of keeping your station properly cleaned. Yeah, so be aware that people have allergies. Remember the acronym FATTOM. Understand that time and temperature are critical to maintaining food safety in the kitchen. Don't thaw your food and leave it out in the open for a long period of time. Always put it in the fridge if you're gonna leave it unattended, and let it naturally defrost, or cold water bath, or microwave, or just cook it, the way it is. So I I hope that you took away something from this lesson. I certainly did. I think I have grown to appreciate food safety, of the importance of it, of knowing all these lessons and what improper handling of food could lead to. That's a death a day is pretty serious, and I hope the more people that know about food safety, the more people will pay attention, spread the word, and kind of put the word out there. All right, so tomorrow lesson I will have how to properly set up one's station with knives and the tools that you need to start cutting, and we're gonna start cutting. So knife skills is something that's coming up tomorrow, so you don't want to miss it. I hope you come back and see the video that's gonna come out tomorrow with the knife skills, and like practice along with me, because I'm gonna be doing a lot of that. But it's really fun, right? I'm really enjoying my time, and I hope you are learning as I learn. All right, so I hope I see you tomorrow. Please hit the subscribe button before you go so you don't miss my next video, and that you're always here along with me on my journey. Take care, and I'll see you tomorrow.